Coming up, the New York Football Giants prepare for the Saints this weekend, but what Giants will be so New York on the field? The injuries pile up, and it begs the question, is this indicative of how the organization feels about Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, or are we still a ticking time bomb waiting to blow up? We dive in next. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host. Over here, Adam Arbrecht. Over there, Andrew Mackowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise, and we're thinking about what we think about this weekend means for the New York Football Giants. Andy, how are we on a Friday?
I'm a little tired. Adam, I was just telling you off show, I played tennis for the first time in, I don't know, say 10 years. And now I have parts of my body that are sore that I never even knew could be sore. So here
Those
I
are
am,
called legs, Andy.
gingerly
Those are called
working my
legs.
way into the weekend.
I love that. That's what you like to see. A man on a mission to be in prime physical condition and doesn't require stretching in any form or fashion. Assume that Andy will be on a strict liquid medication diet going into the weekend to recover. Now, we talk about the Giants this weekend. We started to allude to this last episode where the state of the franchise is. Some guys starting to go on to IR here. And now the question becomes, what is the intention for the remainder of the season? Or do we already know the answer? Because after we saw Dexter Lawrence go on IR with the elbow, after Theo Johnson went on to IR with the foot surgery, then you get into, lower level, but Deontay Johnson's on IR. Deontay Banks is questionable. Okereke, Riley, Nunez-Roche, Belton, Newbin, Neal, Neighbors, and Jermaine Illuminor, all given questionable tags heading into this weekend. Andy, what does it mean to you?
It feels to me like they are just going to list everyone as questionable and then decide who's going to play in these games for the rest of the season. Like, that's kind of where I think this is going to go, because to your point, Adam, if the goal is to still win games and be competitive, then we got to get these guys healthy and out on the field. If the goal is to not have a complete meltdown, lose these games, and still get the ability to have the top pick or the number 2 pick in the draft, then I feel like the Giants are probably doing this thing right. They're not going out signing a bunch of veterans to be able to plug holes for the people that have gone on IR. It's pull up some young people from the practice squad. Let's just keep this thing moving and let's finish everything out.
Yeah, I think that's a fine way to go. Neither you nor I anticipated them being like, hey, I tell you what we're going to do is make sure that we have bodies to get out there and give ourselves a better chance to win. Whether or not we think that they're hedging their bets against accidentally winning does seem to be on the table here. And that's where, at a high level, I think this comes back to what we discussed all week. And a lot of people are obviously having the conversation of, what does it tell you about Brian Daboll, or what does it tell you about Joe Schoen? So let's tackle it from that standpoint. There's all the injuries piling up here, understanding they have a chance at the number 1 overall pick. And frankly, we don't have to do it yet. Picking a quarterback, trading down, whatever move you want to make when it comes to the draft, you'll have every option on the table for you if you sit in that pole position. But does it tell you anything in your mind about Brian Daboll's job security or about Joe Schoen's job security? Because I can split these two guys apart and tell you a different story depending on who we discuss.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think when you look at, we'll start with Brian Daboll. I think that was a good starting point. Is you're talking about a bunch of backups being in. Our left tackle, Andrew Thomas, is already out for the year. Our best player, Dexter Lawrence, is gone. Our original starting quarterback isn't even on the roster anymore. Like, for me, I don't know if there's literally anything from a coaching perspective that Brian Daboll is going to do in the next 5 games that would make me say, wow, he definitely should be here. Look at him winning with Tim Boyle. Like, that's not really, I think, what the goal of all of this is. So for me, I think, Brian, I don't think I'm going to understand anything about Brian Daboll. I think you'll probably learn more about Joe Schoen than you will Brian Daboll in the next couple of weeks. But what's your interpretation of it?
Well, let me caveat. When it comes to Daboll, no, I don't think we're going to learn anything dramatic about Brian Daboll, the coach, over these next handful of games, because you're not going to have a healthy roster. We get that. The question isn't whether or not we're going to learn anything about him. It's whether or not the organization cares if they learn something about him or not. So the one side of it is we think that he's secure. Maris said this earlier in the season, and he's going to stick to those guns. Doesn't matter how bad this gets. We believe in the process. We trust the plan, and we're sticking with it. So it doesn't matter if we end up only having 2 wins on this season. It still serves the long-term agenda. Great. Or flip that coin over, and it's, guess what? We're going to move on from Brian Daboll. So it doesn't matter what happens over the remainder of the season. We want to guarantee that we have the highest possible draft pick. And if Brian Daboll feels like he is either one, fighting for his job, or two, fighting for the perception of him as a coach in the league, then you might not be able to trust him with a healthy roster to not go out and try to win a football game. So that's the only, if you want to get tinfoil hatty here, it's like the organization trying to safeguard against Brian Daboll proving something down the stretch of the season, which, by the way, did kind of happen a year ago with the injury to Daniel Jones, Tyrod, Tommy DeVito. He showcased, hey, I'm capable of taking any QB and having success.
Well, Adam, so I have a question for you. Do you think the decision has already been made on Brian Daboll?
Yes, yes, I do. I think the decision has already been made. What that decision is, I can't guarantee, but I think the decision has been made on him.
And you think that no matter what happens over the next 5 weeks, that decision can't be changed or reversed in a different direction? You think it's like, it's already been made, it's set in stone, so what are we really going to learn about these 5 weeks? Do you think there's anything that could change that?
I think if they are already ready to move on from him, nothing is going to change it. I think if they are right now feeling they're committed to him, I think he can do things to mess that up and lose that confidence over the remainder of the season, because backups or not, there's still game management, right? The way you communicate, how the team looks on Sunday, regardless of who's on the field, can still impact and reflect on the coach. And a lot of this goes back to what we heard from the media in these discussions of, is Daboll losing the locker room a little bit when younger players are speaking up and perception that's a bad thing? Like, that is the part of it that's on the line here for Daboll. Are you still the guy that everyone in the locker room wants to support and get behind?
Yeah, I think you're right in the way that you're thinking about it. Because for me, it's basically no one cares about the wins or the losses. Oh well, no one
Right.
cares about winning the games. At least that is smart about how we
They
rebuild
care
this
about the win because
situation.
it could hurt them if they win.
Right, right. It could hurt them theoretically, but I think to your point, the only thing that matters is whether or not the players still feel like they are being held accountable by Brian Daboll, that they respect him and his decision making as the head coach. If you see everyone checked out around the field and people quitting and not trying their best to win the game, that to me would scream like, how can Brian Daboll come back and be the coach for the team next year if this entire thing is like a complete tire fire? Malik Neighbors is like, it doesn't matter what quarterback there, with the play calling from this guy, I'm never going to have a chance. And you have the defensive players shouting and screaming. Like, I think it could devolve very quickly to the point of like, well, how can you bring him back if none of the players respect him anymore?
Yes, yeah, like it's such a it's so convoluted the way this stuff works in sports. Like, with head coaches, and like you mentioned Malik Neighbors. What does he need to look like he's doing if he's playing these games to make it feel like Brian Daboll is in control? But the one thing you brought up there before we turn over a little bit to Joe Schoen here, and also some, I have some other philosophical questions about the stretch of the season, and then we'll get into the game too. But I think that part of it, remember, there was a stretch of games, was it last season, where it was like, oh, remember all that fire and passion that Brian Daboll was bringing? Kind of looks like a psychopath now. Kind of looks like this dude's unhinged. And I think there's that element of it. Doesn't matter who's playing on the field. If it looks like you're kind of losing your mind, then that can end up becoming kind of the de-evolution of your safety and security in the position. Coming up here in a second, though, let's talk about the players. Let's talk about what they need to or don't need to show. And I have this constantly come back to this perception of what players are supposed to say or not say, how they're supposed to represent some type of organizational agenda. Does that matter when your team is as bad as the Giants have been? We'll talk about that coming up here in just one moment. Before we do, remind you, PIETNTIAL.com. That's potential.com. It's a great place where you have some online resources for your wellness and mental health, You go ahead and get a baseline of your well-being, have tools to improve, and also track your progress over time. Brian Daboll may need this. Malik Neighbors may need this. Rookie. He's been a tumultuous season after being a stud at LSU coming into this organization. So check out Potential, PIETNTIAL.com today. Okay. When we talk about, I want to talk about on the player level here. What is the player's responsibility? Tyrone Tracy Jr. is supposed to go out and what? Not give maximum effort as he tries to cement himself as the number one running back for the New York Football Giants going forward. If he's already locked into that position, then maybe the Giants shouldn't be giving him a lot of reps. Maybe you should see Devin Singletary running that ball a little bit more. And if things start to devolve where there's this clear push and pull of not wanting to win football games, but you got to be a professional. I always philosophically find that hard to understand and wrap my head around, because most of these NFL players are playing for their professional careers, regardless of whether or not this team is in the tank.
The whole thing goes back to the players are going to play hard. The players want second contracts. The players have to feed their families. They are going to do everything they can to shine to be able to get that next contract. And
Yep.
so to me, it's like, I just don't think that the Giants have the talent on the roster to even mess around and win games at this point. Like, even if all of that maximum effort happens from the players that are out there, I just don't see the Giants winning games. Now, it could be interesting. Like, I don't want the Giants to win games, but I want them to try hard, be competitive, and lose the games. But it would actually be fascinating to see, with lesser talent on the field, can Brian Daboll still keep this team competitive? And so,
Right.
yeah, what I would like to see is guys like Turbo Miller, who we talked about all offseason, and practice squad guys that have shown flashes but are maybe just too raw. Like, instead of telling Tyrone Tracy, don't run as hard or whatever it's going to be, it's like, how about instead we give Turbo Miller 10 carries and we give Tyrone Tracy 5 to 7 carries, and we just kind of see what we have in some of these other players. This is the perfect time for them to get live game reps, so that if you need someone like Turbo Miller next year, it's not game one and he's all of a sudden very nervous about the idea of playing in his first career NFL game.
Yeah, and I think it's tricky. Let's talk about some of the guys that we can watch inside of this one. I mean, the QB room is just weird and funky. And again, if you're Drew Lock, what are you trying to showcase or not? You're probably thinking, hey, if anybody gets anywhere near my lower body, I'm going to go ahead and whip this ball wherever it wants to be. And that's the hard part about still wanting to get good looks at players and see if they can be productive for your roster. You mentioned a guy like Turbo Miller. I mean, that's a little bit more even of a deep cut, not in a bad way, of a guy that maybe should get some run here or some burn down the back half of the season. But Jalen Hyatt comes to mind in this category, obviously, even though Eric Gray, maybe we already know what we have in him, probably should see him overseeing a Devin Singletary. Singletary is not a part of this long-term future. Is Bryce Ford Wheaton ready, healthy, available? Okay, let's get him some reps. Ironically, a guy like Darius Slayton, who we talked about beginning of the year, where should he be? What's he deserving of? Who knows? But him losing some of his reps to some of these younger guys is probably the thing to do here as well, because you're not going to learn anything new about Darius Slayton in these games down the stretch. Wan'Dale Robinson, maybe a little more unique. This hasn't been the kind of breakout year we hoped for with him. So there are some of those kind of things. And then I'll even point to, as we can flip over to defense too, but Daniel Bellinger, I think, is another one, right? They bring in Theo Johnson via the draft. All of a sudden, Bellinger, who seemed like a great contributor, doesn't have a role, very ambiguous. They're bringing Manhurts to block. All these things kind of happen. So Bellinger might have a shot here to reclamate what his status is within the organization going forward as well.
Yeah, and obviously you have Theo Johnson going down. As you mentioned, they also claimed Greg Dulcich off of who was released by the Broncos. The Giant, it's actually like him coming out of school out of UCLA.
Yeah.
Yeah, Adam, it's an awkward situation where the outcome of the game really doesn't matter to most Giant. Like, obviously, we want the team to lose, but you don't want your team to quit and give minimal effort. So it's this weird state of like, well, can we actually see individual players maybe grow and progress over the next 5 games? You mentioned a guy like Jalen Hyatt. I think that's spot on. He has to get more reps because you have to know if he's part of the long-term plan. So far, it hasn't really paid dividends, the Jalen Hyatt signing. And I'm looking at John Michael Schmitz. He is a guy that has underwhelmed at the center position, Adam. And it was like, we thought for sure he was a set it and forget it type of offensive lineman. And he just has not been that yet. And so maybe there's something over the next 5 games that we could see from him to make us feel like, hey, we do have the center position taken care of. When Andrew Thomas is healthy, we've got the left tackle. Like, that, to me, those are the big question marks that I look at is, can John Michael Schmitz continue to progress, or do we just have a very average center that we spent a very high draft pick on?
Came out old in the draft as well. He's 26 years old. Like, he is 26 years old already. And listen, offensive linemen's careers are long. So if you all of a sudden figure it out at 26 and 27, it's not the end of the world. But it's just a reminder, when they got him, as you said in the draft, it was, yes, experienced, long tenured college football pro, comes in, starts day one, looks the part. And it's been anything but that. Some injuries have been a factor there as well. If we flip our attention, I'll say, over to the defensive side of the football, there is something that we can watch for over the remainder of the season. So ironically, when we talk about, coaching staffs and is Brian Daboll going to be here? we're not even talking about offensive coordinators at this point. Like, why would we even bring up that name when we think about who's going to be secure or not? What's his role going to be? He was stripped of responsibilities, so it all feels like it falls on Brian Daboll on that side. However, the other side of it, this is something that I do think at a high level is interesting. Keeping or moving on from the staff, if you stick with this, there has to be a real conversation about whether or not Shane Bowen is the right defensive coordinator for this job. There was a remark in the media where he was unaware that Bobby Okereke, who will be out for this game against the Saints, had seen a significant dip in his production over the course of this season. He's not been the same impact player that he was for the Giants when he first came in. Now, granted, when you go and look at the stats for this year, it's not going to. The eye test is really going to tell you more and how he's been used inside of the Giants defense, because he has 93 tackles. He has 47 solo, 46 assists, 2 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. There's been some good work done here, but I would not, and I don't know if you disagree, I would not sit here and say that Bobby Okereke felt like through 12 games the same player that he was a year ago. And when you get Brian Burns in the offseason, we know there's been some injuries, but you had a lot of time to show what you're capable of. Secondary lacking talent or not, this has not exactly been a stellar first season for Shane Bowen as a DC.
Oh, I mean, Adam, there is no way you can bring Shane Bowen back. Like, I
So
think
yeah.
it's a
So what does
foregone
that mean to
conclusion.
you? Like, so what does that mean to you in terms of Brian Daboll? Does that reflect on Brian Daboll? Like, or how do you perceive that when it comes to the head coach? He's the guy that makes the hire. Wasn't their first choice, but he still is the choice you made.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the whole point. It goes to the decision making of Joe Schoen. It goes, and that's why he's in the crosshairs right now, is because there's all these excuses for everyone else not doing things properly. It's like Shane Bowen's not getting the most out of it. Wink Martindale is talking behind people's back. I need to strip Mike Kafka of his play calling duties. We got to get rid of the offensive line coach. Like, oh, we inherited Daniel Jones. I know we gave him that contract, but like someone else was the one that drafted him. Adam, to me, that just sounds like a lot of nonsense, right? Like that's a lot
Yeah.
of pointing at other people, and we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, and we're wondering like who's the captain of this ship. And that to me is the big problem. Is it was a whiff on Shane Bowen. I know that this team has had injuries. I don't think his system resonates. I don't think he's getting the most out of a guy like Deonte Banks. We desperately need him to play better. There's been multiple games where Deonte Banks is either lazy, didn't seem to know what was going on, maybe was aloof, and like Shane Bowen just kind of lets it go and says like, we'll talk about that in-house. It feels like the team isn't performing well on the defensive side of the ball. The players aren't getting any better. In fact, Deonte Banks regressed. Bobby Okereke's play regressed. And so to me, I look at it and I say, there's absolutely no way Shane Bowen can come back. He might be a fine coach. It is not working here in New York, and they have to go back to the well and figure out what is the best system and scheme when you have a franchise building block in Dexter Lawrence on the defensive line, because what it is right now ain't it. It's just not
Yeah,
it.
and listen, and Dexter Lawrence looked really great this season, right before the injury. He did look really good. And I think, and you hate to do this, but sometimes you go, yeah, and that just feels like because Dexter Lawrence is that good. Because that's
Yeah,
how
because
good
he's
Dexter Lawrence is.
amazing. That's why,
Yep.
right? It's like
He's a system independent, and he's going to get his, and he's going to be amazing. He's going to stuff the run. He's going to take on double teams, and he's going to have success. And to your point, whether or not Brian Daboll is the one who ultimately makes the choice to hire Shane Bowen as the DC, Joe Schoen signs off on it. But remember, when they say, if we get Brian Burns, is that good enough for you? It's Shane Bowen who says, like, yep, that will be awesome for me. So you gave him a very expensive ingredient. And by the way, a lot of DCs, no matter if you make a switch here, are going to look and see you have Brian Burns say, great, we can work with him. So it's not even an issue of having that player, but it is an issue of Joe Schoen. If you are in the year one of your DC saying, like, you tell me, is this going to be what you want and you need and you like it? Because those other discussions about pairing Dexter up with his buddy and having this real monster wall in the middle, it's all, reflective decision making. But there are other versions of this offseason that could have happened here for the defensive side of the football. You allowed Shane Bowen to make a very big, I'm not talking about I like this prospect in the draft kind of stuff. I'm talking about new contract, $30 million player in 2025, eating up a big chunk, even if the Giants are going to have big cap space. So that matters. And I do wonder how this will all reflect when the decision-making process happens at the end of the year. Are they going to jettison Shane Bowen? We might think they should, but is it going to be, we believe in the plan, And the Shane Bowen hire and the defensive system was all part of that plan. And those things I think are on the line here. And to be honest, just like with Daboll, and I don't know what I'm going to learn from Shane Bowen over the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season, because what is he going to prove with this roster as currently constituted?
There, just to me, there's no way that Shane Bowen can be back. It hasn't looked good. Players have regressed. To me, you got to find a new voice in that room and a new system that reflects it. But yeah, I think on a larger scale, Adam, this all goes back to Joe Schoen. And it's like, has he done a good job? Or because he's a nice guy and we like him, do we want to think that he has done a good job? Right? Like,
Love nice guys.
I don't know what I'm supposed to think anymore, because we talked about before how we've been like broken down and beaten into submission to now have this like mentality and mindset. But like multiple play callers in the last couple of years, multiple defensive coordinators in the last couple of years, multiple offensive line coaches, multiple quarterbacks, multiple everything, but the problems still exist. So what does that tell you? It tells you that we haven't addressed whatever the biggest problem is. Do you have an idea, like, if it was up to you, would you just clean house completely and say, this isn't working, the minor tweaks are not happening, we got to have a new voice at the top and like reset this whole thing?
I will answer that question by referencing one former Giant, Justin Pugh's perspective on all this in just one moment. All right, before we turn our attention to the game, which matters greatly, as we know, against the New Orleans Saints, and some picks and where the spread lies, Justin Pugh had this perspective around what the Giants could do. And he said the mistakes, everything being accounted for, right? But it basically boiled down to, would you be okay with, Giants fans, a 3-year commitment to the Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll ticket? Because if you go to the draft and you like it and you're at the top and you want Shedeur Sanders, you take them and you afford them the time to build that quarterback and build the system. Or, which I think was very good that he pointed out, maybe you don't take the quarterback at the top. Maybe you go best player available and you still afford more time after a bridge year with a veteran ex-player quarterback, and then you continue to build it, right? And my only pushback was, guess what? Next season, including the draft, you can do the exact same thing with a new GM and a new head coach. They can come in the door and say, if you want to take the quarterback, you can. But if you also want to wait, if you believe in Arch Manning, if you believe in a future prospect, you can wait to do that. And it doesn't fundamentally change what Justin Pugh is talking about outside of feeling like you blew it up again if you're John Mara. So to your question, do I think you need to blow it up? No. But I do think there is this push and pull around the Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll ticket, and whether or not that communication for all of their connections back in Buffalo has added up. Because I can't tell you with certainty that Joe Schoen decided to keep Daniel Jones and Brian Daboll was like, I don't want to do that. That maybe Brian Daboll would have paid Saquon Barkley and would have let Daniel Jones walk, or Xavier McKinney, or player X, Y, or Z. I don't know for a fact that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are on the same page. And that's my biggest concern. And if you believe that when a GM and head coach are hired together, when the GM is hired and he hires the head coach, and you don't have an assurance that they are on that same page, that's your case for blowing it up entirely. Not just lose the head coach, Joe Schoen brings in someone different, and you continue to build. It's just, hey, functionally, you guys broke down and did not present me, John Mara, with a cohesive plan that you both agreed with. And that there does seem to be a disconnect there between Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. And I've talked about this in previous episodes about whether or not these guys are on a diverging path now in year 3 as it winds down.
Well, Adam, it's funny that you say that, because could it be a detriment that they are friends and they are friendly with each other, where it's like almost if there was a little bit more friction, they would be more likely to call out bad decisions?
Right, Daboll, don't sign Daniel Jones, for the love of God.
Yeah, like, well, Joe wants it, so I guess I'm cool with it. Whereas, like, if he didn't have that feeling about Joe Schoen, he would have been like, I don't want this to happen. I don't want this coach. Like, don't you think you could be a little bit more vocal when you're not worried about, like, pulling on the heartstrings of a friend, so to speak? It's like, I almost wonder if them being too, like, they like each other a lot, so they're not going to create any conflict, but maybe conflict is sometimes needed to make some of the tough decisions. And so, like, as you see here, it just feels like it hasn't worked. And maybe it's because of that alignment that you talked about before.
More things that I want to get into next week. We'll turn our attention over to the game here, but you can answer this right now if you want to. Do you think, from what you've seen, Hard Knocks and otherwise, would you say that Brandon Brown's personality is more aligned with Brian Daboll's disposition than Joe Schoen's is? Because I think there is this wrinkle here of, if Joe Schoen is the guy leaving and Brendan Brown is the guy moving up, because he's kind of the hot name right now in terms of assistant GMs, there is this world where maybe those butting heads can live a little bit larger when you think back to some of that Hard Knock stuff where Brian Daboll, it's just his demeanor. I defended it, by the way, too. He's laying back. He's just relaxing on the couch. But as Joe Schoen is saying, we're not going to do this, and you got to trust about the market that, and beep, bop, bop, boo. Brian Daboll's general response was like, yeah, that sounds good. Like, almost as if, I don't know if I have anything, like, what is my voice here? Do I get to really have an input here, or am I just putting the trust in Joe Schoen? I do wonder about that shifting dynamic, which would seem surprising out of all the possible outcomes, where Daboll stays and it's Joe Schoen that ultimately goes.
It feels kind of crazy to think about that if you're an offensive coach and you are Brian Daboll, that you were in 100% agreement on letting Saquon Barkley walk. Like, any offensive coach would be like, why are we letting this guy out the door? That's crazy. Pay him. Well, let's get rid of a defensive player or something. Like, you have to have Saquon back there. He's electric. And like, you didn't hear any pushback or anything. You did from some of Joe Schoen's confidants to be like, the Eagles are going to pay him money. There are teams that are interested at that high number. We just want to let you know he is going to get the money that you don't think he's going to get. So like that whole thing to me is quite fascinating. And I almost want to go back and watch Hard Knocks one more time to see if like Brian Daboll's laid back demeanor was more like, well, he's my friend, so I'm not going to argue with him, but like, I don't like what we're doing here. I think watching it with a different, like a fresh set of eyes on that could be pretty telling in terms of where the relationship stands today.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. This is going to be, obviously, we have more weeks of this and the entire off season to try to figure it out. And then we'll also get, by the way, right, Black Monday is going to come for a lot of coaches around the league, and we'll see. Although the Giants typically are not that type of organization. They drag their feet a little bit. They deliberate. They have internal discussions before they come to those conclusions. They have, though, as was the case with Joe Schoen and that hiring, they were proactive around that. They did try to hit the ground running with that search when they moved on to a new regime. When we think about Sunday, we think about the game. Saints at the Giants. Andy, generational season ticket holder, we often talk about. I know you and several key family members are going to be there early. You're going to be tailgating. You're going to stay for the full 60-minute game, halftime, shirts off, Giants across the chest. Giants +5 at home, over under 41 points. What's your general impression of this game?
My general impression is, one, the Giants are very banged up in terms of injuries, and we already don't have our left tackle. We might not have our right tackle. We know our best player, Dexter Lawrence, is out for the year. I look at it and say, even if we were completely healthy, I don't know if this team could beat the New Orleans Saints. Now that you may say Malik Neighbors and Jermaine Illuminor and others may not play in this game, it just further reinforces the fact that the Giants are not going to win this game. And so for me, the question is more like,
oh, really? Because historically, my instinct would be there's nothing on paper to suggest the Giants are going to win this game. Thank goodness they'll finally tank to the bottom, and then they go out and they win the football game. That is.
But I just don't think they even have enough talent that is available to like mess around and actually get. Like,
doesn't matter.
Like, catch a ball in the end zone.
The ball backwards to their own end zone 9 times, and the Giants win 18-0 on safeties.
Right, yeah, like that's how far-fetched I feel like it has to be in order for the Giants to find a lane. And look, we want the Giants to lose. The Alvin Kamara is still a very, very good football player for the New Orleans Saints. The Giants' rush defense is not very good. He is going to be getting the ball out in space and making things happen. To me, I look at this as the Giants get down early, maybe 13-0, something like that, and then they try to get down into the end zone at least one time in the game so that everyone can clap when they score a touchdown. To me, this feels like a 20-7 game where the Saints never really had too much heartburn in the game, and the Giants can't really move the ball and score the ball when they have half the talent available on their roster. Where do you kind of stand on this game? Are you going big upset and then that Drew Lock is going to be the guy?
Woo! Watch out, everybody. Yeah, watch it burn. I think what you want to see is, and to your point, maybe get down early. The Giants' run defense has not been stellar. this season as it stands anyway. But when you look over in terms of the tankathon situation, it's like New Orleans losing this game doesn't kill them either. Like they wouldn't hate to be 4-9 and thinking a little bit upward mobility in terms of where they are in the draft odds. I think the most important thing for me is Jalen Hyatt. Show me a handful of routes that look really good and connect on passes. Maybe no touchdowns, but show that you've taken a step forward. And that's more about this week and the rest of the season, because I can't tell him to turn it on in one game after effectively seeing next to nothing for the entire year. Wan'Dale Robinson, guys like this, I'll keep an eye on. If Tyrone Tracy Jr. is playing and getting the lion's share of the carries, at least for the start of this game, show me you're securing that football, right? There is a growth area for you as you transition from wide receiver to running back. So there's individual play. That's all I'm really looking for. Show me a handful of individuals. Ironically, the cornerback position is not going to matter at all. Maybe, Cordell Flott. We can look in the secondary at guys, right? So there's some names to think about, but a lot of the key players that are injured and questionable right now that could end up being doubtful and then out, those are a lot of the guys you'd look at in this game. Tyler Newman, let's see you develop and grow, right? Dane Belton, let's see you step up. Oops, sorry. They may not be available for this game either. So I think about some individual performances, but I think beyond on the field for the Giants here, and I go to the Jacksonville Jaguars playing the Tennessee Titans. Jacksonville is the top team right now in the draft order. The Titans are there at 7th. You want the Titans desperately to get this win. You want them to be, you want Jacksonville, to get this win. Be 3-10. Pull Tennessee to 3-10. That's all right. We got to just keep mucking this thing up, and then Las Vegas as well. So while I'm watching the Giants game and individual performances, I'm also watching Vegas play Tampa Bay, and I want to see how that game unfolds here, because the Giants and all the flexibility to do what you want is dependent on getting that number 1 pick. Number 2 can work, number 3 can work, but watching those other games is just as critical as whatever the Giants do on Sunday.
I think you're spot on, Adam. The result really doesn't matter. We want the Giants to play competitive football, but at the end of the day, honestly, I'm going to keep my eye on the red zone and looking at the other games around the league. You mentioned that Jaguars game. If they mess around and win a game or two, that can only benefit the Giants. Our only goal is to get a top 2 pick to have the ability to take a franchise quarterback if you want it. You can't go around and win a game like against the Saints, and you really hope that the Jaguars continue to at least try to be competitive under Doug Peterson. But really, what is there to say about this game, honestly, right? Like, what's your prediction on the score? Like, do you even have something in mind?
Yeah, Giants, I don't know. I mean, the Dallas game, right? It finishes 27-20, but we know it wasn't really a one-possession game. Something like that makes a lot of sense. 25, the over-unders at 41. So, I mean, probably on the lower side of that, right? I don't know, 21-13, something like that, where it feels like, okay, maybe 24-16, a couple of field goals. Gano shows off his leg in the latter stages of the season, right? All real useless information that doesn't inform anything for me. No, so I think the Giants lose this game. I think that if Drew Lock starts to open it up offensively, we probably see some interceptions from him too. And it'll just be some fun moments for the Saints, who are a team that are not in the same boat as the Giants in terms of like what their next step is. Certain teams are trying to tank their way out. Jacksonville still wants to show they're not a terrible football team under Doug Peterson. The Saints want to show they can win football games. The Giants need to lose. So those agendas do drive things a little bit, even if we don't see it on the surface. And just quickly notable that the New England Patriots are off this week, but the one other game that does matter inside a tankathon is going to be the Carolina Panthers. They're playing the Eagles. Expect that to be a loss for Carolina as well. So things at the top of this draft are going to stay very condensed for the final 5 weeks of the year.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Adam, 5 more games, 5 critical games. We hope the Giants lose, but we want them to be competitive so that it benefits us in the long run. This New Orleans game, I can tell you I will not be standing there hours and hours and hours on end this time. I just want everyone to play nice, no one get hurt, and let's move on to the next game the Giants could potentially lose on the schedule.
Andy will be over at Xanadu riding the slopes and just having himself a heck of a little Sunday. You can, of course, get us over on YouTube at One Giant Podcast on the podcast feeds. Go subscribe there, share it with a loved one. Nothing says Christmas comes early like giving a friend or family member the gift of my voice and Andy's voice in their ears 3-4 times a week talking New York Football Giants. So think about that if you can. On X at Adam Armbrecht, at AMAC214, at One Giant Podcast. Oh, baby. 5 more to go. Just counting it down like we're going to New Year's. Until the next time, until the best times. As Andrew Mackwoods would want, need, and demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.